Good evening, and welcome to the First Baptist Church of Medford. I'm Pastor Greg, and it is a pleasure and a delight to welcome once again the Fireside Ensemble for this concert to benefit the food pantry at the Brighton Allston Congregational Church in Brighton Center. Food insecurity is a growing issue in the Boston metro area, and the food pantry is endeavoring to provide for an even greater number of people in need. So all donations for this concert will be given, courtesy of the Fireside Ensemble, will be given to the food pantry. Once again, welcome. When I saw the Jurassic Park on the program, I was hoping for some velociraptors, but I don't see any. So enjoy the concert. Thank you for being with us tonight. And once again, please consider donating generously. You'll hear more about the Allston Brighton Food Pantry later on in the program. Thank you.
Thank you for the intro. Oh, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Pastor Greg. And I am Jess. I am part of the ensemble here, Fireside Ensemble. Thanks so much for coming out to the show tonight. We're so happy to have you here. You just heard the theme from Jurassic Park, which is composed by John Williams. You will hear more John Williams later on in the show as well. And that piece was arranged by Arjun, sitting on the playing viola. Yeah, and it's a fitting opening to this concert because we will be hitting notes of danger, drama, and love in the coming pieces. So to say a few words about ourselves, we are a chamber group. We're friends, and we love making chamber music accessible to all types of audiences, and in spaces like this, which are like community spaces that are a bit more casual than your typical concert hall. And we have Sarah on piano, Sarah Rumbley. Yeah. Arjun Mudan on viola. And Maddie Tucker on cello. And I am Jess Lynn on violin. And we also will have a new member of the ensemble coming in August. We also have pieces on the program tonight that are composed by our friend Jeremy, who could not make it tonight because he's at a family trip, which is great. But we're really glad that he was able to arrange some pieces for us. So in the first half, you'll see on the program, we have movie music, like directly from movies. And the biggest challenge for us was how do you translate an orchestral piece or a pop song into just 4 instruments? So you can tell us later how we did. In the second half, you will hear a piece that we think could be in a movie, so hint, hint, but doesn't yet have a plot to it. So, and we will have a special contest for you all to participate in. We'll say more in the beginning of the second half. So thank you so much to First Baptist for making this concert possible. It is a benefit concert, but none of this would be possible without their generous allowing us to use the space. There's also folks to shout out. Steve Taylor and Mike Booth are in the back making the AV work and all of this the sound system work, and making it accessible to the live stream. We also want to thank Holly Zagaria, who is the music director here. She is not here right now, but she's been making it possible for us to get into the space for rehearsals. And yeah, it's been great, really great working with First Baptist. And so now we're going to kick off the concert. Sarah will introduce our next piece.
Okay, hello. Up next, we will be... Sure. All right, is this better? Cool. Okay. Up next, we will be visiting ancient China with music from Disney's animated film Mulan, composed by Jerry Goldsmith, Matthew Wilder, and David Zippel. Like the movie, our arrangement will open with a beautiful sweeping theme that represents the cultural honor and tradition of ancient China. For Mulan, a young woman, this tradition means an interview with a local matchmaker to find her a husband. She bombs the interview rather spectacularly. On top of that, the Huns invade China and her elderly father is summoned to war. Mulan is faced with both the matchmaker's disappointment and the prospect of losing her father. After the call to war, the music will bring us to the beloved reflection theme, which captures Mulan's internal struggle between who she's expected to be and who she is inside. I can relate to looking in the mirror and needing a haircut, but Mulan really gets down to business. She takes a sword, gives herself a perfectly straight bob, pulls a Grand Theft horse, and joins the army to take her father's place. Against all odds, she uses her determination and resourcefulness to defeat the Huns, saving not only her father, but also all of China. In the end, she finds her own way to bring honor to her family, her country, and herself. We hope this arrangement does her justice and brings honor to us all.
Thanks. We're now journeying from ancient China to Middle Earth, a transition that's easier than you might think, since both stories feature unlikely heroes, epic battles, and the triumph of courage over impossible odds. Though I should mention, Mulan managed to save China without having to throw any jewelry into volcanoes, which frankly seems more efficient. Tonight we're featuring music inspired by creatures who prove that height isn't everything. As someone who shops in the petite section, I find this deeply validating. For those unfamiliar with the story, The Lord of the Rings follows a hobbit named Frodo who inherits his uncle's ring only to discover it's actually an ancient weapon of evil that must be destroyed. The solution? Take a very long, very dangerous walk to throw it into a volcano. Chaos, friendship, and heroism ensue. So Howard Shore is the original composer, and his score proves that epic adventures require epic orchestration. You simply cannot save Middle Earth with a kazoo. So our friend Jeremy has arranged this piece, and he's taken on the challenge of capturing all of the sweeping cinematic grandeur and condensing it into a piano quartet. And somehow with just 4 instruments, I think he's managed to capture that spirit. So we promise this performance will be shorter than the extended editions and comes with comfortable seating and significantly fewer orcs. Please enjoy.
Okay. There we go. I'm also in the Petite Grad, so I appreciated that too. Next up, we have a trifecta of love songs. Our medley opens with a song called Shallow from the 2018 romantic drama A Star is Born. This is a duet between two people that expresses the two main characters' search for something deeper in life and in love. And Lady Gaga actually sang this live on set while filming the movie, so if it was extra touching, that's why. It was actually live. And then next, we go from Los Angeles to ancient Greece for Go the Distance from Hercules. Not quite a love song in the typical sense, but we can imagine a little bit. It's more of a song of self-discovery, belonging, and loving oneself. And then finally, the medley concludes with one of my personal favorites, Can You Feel the Love Tonight from The Lion King. As a fun fact, this song was originally supposed to be a song for comic relief between Timon and Pumbaa. But luckily, Elton John pushed back against this idea because he wanted it to be the epic love anthem that it is today when Nala and Simba start to fall in love. So these three songs might not be the obvious three songs to pair together in a mashup, but together they create an interesting arc, taking a leap of faith, the personal quest for worthiness, and the moment when love finally clicks into place. And the arrangements are done by Jeremy and Jess.
To close out this half, we're going to travel to a long time ago and a galaxy far, far away. The first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, was released in 1977, which means that the world has known John Williams' iconic themes for nearly 50 years. Over that time, the director George Lucas and others have produced over 9 films, several television series, countless Lego sets and other toys. Ask my mom about the Lego sets. There were way too many of them in my house. At least one officially recognized religion, and a whole universe of characters, some beloved, think Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, some rather less so, think Jar Jar Binks. The stories told in the Star Wars universe are old. They're some of the oldest stories known to humanity. A young boy is tempted by evil powers and eventually succumbs to them, but his son meets the same powers and defeats them. A strong woman and a rogue man meet, initially grate on each other, and then realize that they in fact bring out each other's better natures. A wise teacher realizes he no longer has the strength to guide new pupils, except for the last one who will carry on his lineage. Countless people die in wars that could have probably been avoided with more judicious leadership. Somehow, the fate of the world, or many worlds, can sometimes be decided with a dice throw. John Williams brought all of these stories to life with themes that are as memorable as the best of the Western classical music canon. With these 4 instruments, and our friend Jeremy's arrangement, you'll hear a choir singing a requiem for Judgment Day, the relentless march of an overwhelming enemy, a tragic romantic theme where the 2 lovers will never have a happily ever after, the beautiful mystery of a force beyond our comprehension, the dawn of a new hope for the galaxy, and the triumph of good over evil. We hope you enjoyed all of these movie themes, and yeah, we hope you're enjoying this first half.
Thanks so much. That rounds out our first half. And before we go on break, I will tease that we have a contest coming up in the second half, so definitely check it out. We'll also now have a few words from a representative from the Allston Brighton Food Pantry. So yes, this is Pastor Nakira. Oh, okay.
This is Matt Jones, who is the chair of our food pantry board.
Thank you, Pastor. And what a beautiful display so far. I mean, this has been fantastic. So another round of applause. As Pastor Nakira mentioned, my name is Matt Jones. I'm an active volunteer and chair of the board for the Allston Brighton Food Pantry. We certainly touch a lot of folks, not just in that area, but the greater Boston area. I'm sure a lot of folks might be coming from lots of different areas, but just on behalf of the Allston Brighton Food Pantry and the pastors that are here today, as well as Pastor Deshay in the back, just wanted to thank the Fireside Ensemble, first and foremost for presenting this wonderful concert tonight and thinking about us and, really putting the Allston Brighton Food Pantry at the forefront. Just a few remarks about the people that we serve. Of course, in a perfect world, it would be fantastic if our organization didn't have to exist, but we do. And in 2024 alone, we served about approximately 17,000 individuals. We've seen a large increase year over year, month over month, week over week, day over day almost, with regards to the need in the community. Also, just with the ever-changing landscape that's going on, things are constantly changing for those that even before might not have needed, assistance. So we're there to help not only those in the Allston Brighton community, but the greater Boston community, as I mentioned. In the beginning of 2024, our community supper, we served about 75 meals per week, and that has now increased to about serving 200 each week. In addition, we've seen about a 53% increase in our Saturday food distribution and 127% increase in clients coming to our Wednesday distribution. So all that to say, the need is great, and certainly really appreciate all of the generous donations that you've already made today as you came in, so really appreciate that. Also just wanted to mention on a typical Wednesday, right now we prepare for about 165 bags of groceries and 180 meals. And then even scrambling at the end of each night to find more as the need and the demand increase. And then on Saturday, we prepare for about 150 clients to receive the equivalent of 3 full grocery bags of food. So all that to say that the need is there. It's unfortunate, again, as we mentioned, that we need to exist. In a perfect world, we're not here, but really appreciate all the donations that you provided today. It goes a long way to serving those that are in need in our community. And I just want to pass it off to Pastor Nakira as well, but really appreciate all the donations, and thank you. And thank you all.
I can't remember having more fun at a work application, so thank you all so much for this evening. I'd like to tell you a brief story about someone who accessed our services in the last year. And I'll start it at the end, which is that this spring I got a text message from a young woman who I'll call here Crystal, saying that she had just been sober for 6 months. And when I got this text message, I cried because I know where she has been and how far she has come. About 8 months prior, Crystal came to Massachusetts in order to find gender-affirming health care that she wasn't able to get where she lived. And when she was discharged from the hospital, she had literally nowhere to go. Her plan was to find a well-lit street corner to sleep on. And we know that for any young woman, sleeping on the street is not really a safe proposition. So fortunately, someone in our community interceded and said, hey, I think there's a church where you might be able to get some help. And so she came to us, and we were able to set her up with a tent in our front yard. We have a thrift store where we gave her some gift certificates so she could get gender-affirming clothing. She accessed our Wednesday community supper to get at least one hot meal a week. And we have a community refrigerator that's open 24/7 that people in our community put things in when they've got a little extra and take things out of when they're in need. It's in the parking lot, so everybody has access all the time. And through that, she was able to be fed, be housed. She used our shower, our washing machine, so that she could stay presentable and go to job interviews. Eventually, she was able to get into a transitional housing program. And she started coming into the doors of our church. And the first thing that she said after she sat through a Sunday service was, "I never imagined there could be a church where someone like me could be welcomed like this." And so these are the types of stories that come through our community all of the time, and we'd like to ask you to consider donating to support those who are really in need in our community now more than ever. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. We'll be back in 10 minutes, so feel free to use the restrooms. There is a women's room through these doors, and just to the right in the hallway, there's a unisex bathroom if you go down the stairs near the entrance, and I think those are probably the two that I'll call. Oh, there's a men's room out this way. Okay, thank you, Holly. All right, see you all for the second half. All right, welcome to the second half of the show. Woo! So for the second half, we will be playing a more traditional classical piece, but we think that it could be paired with a movie plot. And this piece is Dvorak. You might know the name Dvorak if you've heard of the New World Symphony. That's one of his very famous works. But Dvorak wrote this piece in 1890, so a while back, when he was about 50 years old. So he was already established by this time. It's his second piano quartet, and it has 4 movements. So the first and fourth movements are very exciting and dramatic. There's a very lovely, one of the loveliest melodies he wrote is in the second movement. And the third movement's very playful and like a dance. So Dvorak, fun fact, he found it very easy to write this piece, which seems unfair given how amazing it is. He wrote a friend, "It's going unexpectedly easily and melodies are coming to me in droves." So he was very inspired. And so for this piece, we're running a contest to go along with it. So there is a movie theme to this whole entire show, right? So where's the movie? So this is where you will write the movie plot. And so that is the contest. We're challenging you to write a movie plot that would go along with the movements of this piece and submit that. So, I mean, I have one that I usually thought of, but based on this sort of exciting, romantic, dance, exciting, you can maybe come up with something that fits into that. And the more you can sort of call out, hey, elements of this piece might go with this part of the plot, all the better. So in the online version of the program, there is a form where you can submit, and there will be a prize. We will get you movie tickets to a theater near you. So wherever you live, even the folks on the live stream. So yeah, we're going to play the 4 movements without break, which is pretty traditional, and see you at the end. Take notes. So that concludes our concert. And I hope you all have ideas now for the movie plot you're going to write. Again, that is on the online program. You can't miss it. There's a big green box when you scroll down. And also, even if you're not going to participate in the contest, please sign up for the email list so that you can find out who the winner is. So that's also on that page. All right, thank you all so much. And yeah, we'll be right back out to mingle and chat with you all.